morning. How's everybody? Did you have a good Labor Day?
Yes.
Good. Was it too short?
Yes.
Yeah, the unfortunate thing about Tuesday, Thursday classes in the fall is we don't get a lot of the breaks that the Monday, Wednesday classes get. So I apologize for that. But, you know, did you go to the lake? No.
Labor.
You did labor. That's a good thing to do on Labor Day. So today we'll start talking about environmental scanning. And I told you at the beginning of the semester that marketing is different than all your other classes and that you're already an expert. And you are already an expert at environmental scanning, aren't you? You just didn't call it environmental scanning, but you do this all the time. If you weren't constantly scanning the environment on your own, you would become a product of natural deselection, right? When you walked out of the parking lot, if you weren't constantly aware of what was going on around you in the environment, the way your fellow students drive, you would have been hit and dead by now. So you've constantly done this. You know, as long as you can remember, you've been engaged in environmental scanning. What I want you to consider in your groups today is I want you to come up with what you think are the most important. Now we're going to narrow it down. I asked you what the most important topics in marketing, your three top important things and topics where issues in marketing were previously. Now let's start to narrow that down and let's look at that in terms of this environmental scan, in terms of the social, the economic, the technological, the competitive, and the regulatory. I want each group to come up with their top thing in each of those categories. And I also want you to, as a second part of this, I want you to think about how these things are interrelated. So something may be both competitive and also fall into a regulatory scheme. So think about things like that, how these topics overlap. One of the things that this course is really good at in terms of expanding your critical thinking field or skills is because the field is so broad, marketing is so broad and touches on so much, that a lot of these things are not mutually exclusive or inclusive categories, and you have to sort of think about that. So I want you to think about how these things may cross over into other categories, how and why, and come up with one for each one in your groups, and we'll come back in about 10 minutes and discuss that. And then we'll talk for a little bit. And then on Thursday, we will have a lawyer here to talk about the UCC and how it impacts environmental scanning. So go ahead and break into your groups and let's do that. And we'll come back and talk about it in about 10 minutes. You have a spokesperson from each group, hopefully elected. So try to change spokespeople throughout the semester so that everybody has an opportunity to stand up and talk. And we'll start with this group right down here.
Okay, I guess. For the first social, we did social networks starting to use their information to start targeting you for advertising.
Okay.
For economic, we did inflation going up and people's income and job unemployment is low. Technological, just keeping up with what is up. You can create a marketing strategy for a new computer, but by the time you get it done, there's already a new one. Competitive, just being different from all the other companies now that many companies sell basically the same thing, just different designs. And then regulatory, keeping regulations intact to protect valuable resources because of our unlimited wants and limited resources.
Okay, do any of those overlap?
I think we kind of didn't get that far, but we did find that technology can overlap with the forces of social media because, you know, with the new Facebook app messenger, they can access your stuff now, and that leads into technology and targeting, you know, for the social network.
Okay. Could it overlap with something else?
Regulatory, because there probably needs to be more regulations for it.
Yeah, I think that's right. There probably needs to be more regulation of what is and is not private. Right? One of the things that happened with Facebook is people started getting fired because they thought their settings were posted to private, and Facebook had gone through and done an update, and it had reset everybody's settings, and they were open. And so, for example, a teacher had posted that all of her students were little diseased germ bags, and she got fired over it. It was the Facebook effect that did a whole show on that. Okay, let's see. The next kind of group up.
Here?
Yep.
So for social, we said the cultural changes of gender in the United States.
What do you mean by that?
What do we mean by that?
I think we mean more of the demographic changes of gender, because gender is like a demographic.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
For economic, we said employment rates, also product pricing, and also different stocks and shareholders buying and selling. For technological, we just put social media, obviously. Competitive, we said like competitive advantages, adapting to different changes, and that overlaps with economic and technological. And then for regulatory, we put regulations on product safety.
Okay, so you think that's going to be the biggest thing in the future is regulation on product safety?
Yeah.
Okay. What kinds of products do you think are inherently unsafe?
Dollars.
Cell phones?
True.
Okay.
Things that haven't like been researched yet, like the extensive effects that they can have.
Child
Okay.
products too, unsafe for certain ages.
All right. Yeah, one of the things that they don't know, for example, there's a study out that suggests that children who grow up with technological devices are more likely to develop autistic type spectrum disorders because they learn to associate with a machine first before they learn to become socialized with human beings. And you see this with little kids, they're very good at getting on. My nephew and niece are 3 and 4, and they can get on the iPad and start doing stuff faster than you can, stop them. And before you know it, they're off to the races. So, all right. Next group back up here.
For social, we put smartphones, TV, and internet. And then economic, we put employment rate, poverty, and income. Technological, we put online shopping, phones and apps. Competitive, other businesses, reviews. Regulatory, privacy, and hackers. And to overlap our part, they're all mainly technological based.
Okay. So there's some technology that overlaps into all of the other areas, you think? As a result of the fact that we are becoming increasingly more and more technologically dependent? Okay, very good.
And then we said like we're social networking, like Twitter, Facebook, and Tumblr, and all that. And then economic, your consumer income, and technological, like new updates and connectivity. And competitive, we said like small businesses versus corporations. And then regulatory, like abiding by state laws and self-regulation. And then the most obvious one that overlaps like the social and technological is consumer-oriented and user-friendly.
Okay. Yeah, technology has made us a lot more capable of engaging in consumerism and being able to mass produce things that are highly individualistic. That sort of value co-creation that we've been talking about, that theme that will run throughout this class. All right, very good.
We did for social, internet, and like social media trends that are going on. For economic, like international affairs and relationships, and the monetary value and the health of the overall dollar. Technological, digital advertising, competitive, did online customer views of the businesses, and be successful, you gotta be unique to your rivals. Regulatory, just like the overall green and healthy life trend that's going on. And technology also overlaps with social media. But everything that must be like regulated and ethical, so regulation is a big factor in all the other places.
Okay. Do you think that there will be something else besides Facebook that will take its prominence in that? Okay. Almost all of the groups so far have said social media, right? Do you think there's going to be something that will take over Facebook? Or do you think Facebook has won it?
I think it's going away.
You think it's what?
I think it's going away. I think people are getting tired of it. It's getting old.
Yeah.
My parents showed up on like.
That's it. Yeah. See ya. Out of here. Okay. Group back there.
There are technological issues or trends, it's just going through social media and reaching everyone with it.
Okay, very good. Did you guys back there?
For social, we kind of talked about how it's so common for the youngest generations to have technologies right there in their hands, have iPads, iPhones, that kind of stuff already, other tablets and stuff like that. So I think that's just even more and more common, which opens up many avenues for marketing. For economic, we actually talked about inequality between the rich and the poor, and how that kind of changes the disposable income, and that kind of way the economy is going. Is right now we have some of the richest of the rich, and some of the biggest inequality in our history and stuff like that. So for technological, a lot about losing jobs due to technology, because it's very easy for many people's jobs to be replaced by a single machine. Even when it comes down to like manufacturing, technological stuff, where you're like restaurants making food using robots or that type of process. For competitive, we were thinking that competition is going down with large businesses. There's more and more, as opposed to multiple little businesses. There's just a few big, huge businesses. Even if you just look at like cable companies, you probably only have 2 or 3 in your area. Or even look at cell phones. Look at where you're going to get your cell phone coverage from, that kind of stuff. So, or even talking about Facebook. There's really no competition with Facebook right now. There's a little bit, but nothing that really comes close. For regulatory, because of all the new questions that come up with technology, a lot of stuff needs to be reevaluated or re-regulated, because we currently don't have regulation for some of the new technology, some of the new forms of culture that are coming out. So they'll continue to be asked questions and continue to grow as well. So because of that, all of ours pretty much really overlap very, very heavily.
So your note on the economic, in terms of economic inequality, what do you think will happen as a result of this? What does your group think will happen as a result of this overwhelming inequality, which we've seen a greater economic disparity between rich and poor in this country than at any time prior to the Industrial Revolution?
The thing we're talking about is the regulation, I think, will probably eventually have to come in and take a hand in there. And if it doesn't, we're going to see another economic collapse like you would expect to see, with no buying power. And so if there's no buying power, then big businesses can't sell anything, because the people that you're selling to can't buy it. If they can't buy it, then all the money is just going to pretty much disappear. So.
Okay. Very good. Good answers.
Okay. For the social, we talked about social media and does marketing and advertising actually reach the consumers? Because we've learned to filter it out. Like when you're on a laptop or desktop, when you see those advertisements on the side, you actually look at them, you notice them, because we don't. Or when you're on your mobile, there's actually not very many advertisements. Economic, we talked about learning to adapt to a larger consumer base by appealing to several different cultures globally. Technological, keeping up and effectively adapting to continuous developments in technology. Competitive, not only creating and having a competitive advantage, but effectively communicating that to consumers. And regulatory, educating consumers about the regulatory standards that affect them and how they overlap the social and technological, obviously, and adaptability. Almost every issue in the categories require adapting to a changing environment.
Okay. Very good. All right. This group right in here.
Okay, so for social, we thought the most important trend is going to be globalization as far as marketing goes, just because now you're seeing, like, we're in a time where you just now start reaching everyone at a global level. You don't have to start targeting locally. You can target anywhere you want, just to specific groups of people or regions or whatever. And then economic, kind of staying on the globalization, the purchasing power is trending to be a lot higher than it ever has been in history. I mean, we might look at America and you say it's going down, but globally, depending on who you're targeting marketing-wise, people have more money to buy little stuff now than they ever have. And then as far as technology, as far as the trend moving forward as far as marketing goes, we put online advertising says social media, everyone's always got devices in their hands and they're on social media. So being able to advertise online and reach people directly is probably going to be something big trending in the future, where it already is now. And then competitive because of online advertising, and it's so much easier for everyone to get their word out to people. We think one of the biggest trends are going to be who can provide the path of least resistance as far as getting the product. Because you got so many things in your face, it's like who can get it the easiest and the best value. So that's what we do as far as competition. And then regulatory, with the technology and all the online stuff, privacy protection is probably going to be a big issue, or it already is. And then as far as the trends, environmentally friendly stuff will probably be a big trend as it is right now, because as people become more conscientious of that, they're going to want to support products and services that help support and maintain the environment. And they all overlap because from a marketing standpoint, they're all consumer-oriented issues, whether you're targeting people, socially, economically, they're buying technology online, it's all consumer-oriented, so that's how they overlap.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think all of these categories sort of overlap in terms of the impact that they have on consumers and business. It's interesting that you all talked about globalization. Do you think, for example, after World War II, they just decided, there was this conference, and and part of the peace process and things like that, they decided to have this idea of a world currency, and the United States won, sort of by default. Keynes, the economist, wanted the pound to be the world currency, and the United States became the world currency instead. Do you think that will always be the world currency in this global market? The world's reserve currency? No? What do you think will be the world's reserve currency? Somebody? What? The euro? Okay. All right. That group back there? Yeah, yeah.
Okay, sorry. For social, we said that it's going to be, the trend's going to be that we're going to try to market to a global consumer audience. We're going to be reaching out to a more diverse demographic because of the technological advances. Since everybody's closer together now, it's going to stay a very diverse group of people that you're going to be marketing. For economic, I think the issue is going to be an overall income, since, as we all know, rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. So I feel like it's going to keep narrowing down our audiences that we're going to be marketing to. For technological, the trend is going to be rapid advances in technology. The issue is going to be that it's going to be hard to keep up with new inventions and new technologies, since there's always going to be somebody out there that's going to want to make something better than yours. For competitive, it's going to be challenging to market with established companies like the monopolies that we have. For example, Apple, Microsoft. So it's going to be hard to push your product out there with these well-established monopolies. And for the regulatory, I think there's going to be issues with copyrights and patents, because like copyright is an issue right now because everything's on the internet, and I feel like in the future it's going to be a bigger issue.
Yeah, how do we compete in a global market and make sure that our copyrights and our intellectual property are protected when you've got nations like China that are willing to pirate everything that we put out there? And and it's really easy. I mean, it's amazing how quickly Disney will release a movie, and it's already, you can get it at Old Paris flea market, the pirated copy from China already before it's been released by Disney to DVD. Okay, good. The back row.
For the social aspect of like trends and stuff, we talked about like social media, the news and the internet, like how everybody else talks about social media, and how like it stretches out to a lot of the younger population and stuff like that. how it is marketed and data collection that happens online through like to make charts and like pie charts and graphs and things that show like trends and whatnot. For competitive, we talked about collaboration between like big companies and how that kind of sets some sort of like caliber for other companies to kind of look at and see some sort of advantage or even competition with that. We see consumer-generated content like feedback, reviews, which also kind of shine a light on some portions of like a company, like whether these products are good or not, or whether somebody else should try them out, and word of mouth. For regulatory, we talked about businesses becoming more health-oriented and becoming more environmentally aware, and stuff like privacy protection and intellectual property others do, and how they all overlap with each other. Like, what is social media without technology? What is competitive and regulatory, like combining together? You know, without some sort of other infrastructural stronghold, these issues standing alone don't really have much to have very many credentials. You know, just standing alone.
So one of the things that you touched on, that your group touched on, was this idea of the younger generation and targeting the younger generation through technology and things like that. Do you think that that actually shifts the power dynamic towards your generation, away from what is traditionally? So what we've seen in this country in terms of economic forces is we've seen a shift in economic resources from young to old, right? Traditionalists hold the vast majority of sort of the money in this country because, A, they saved, they came from a generation that saved. Maybe it's because they didn't have as many technological stuff to buy that was really cool that we have to spend our money on, that all of us run out and instantly gobble up because we believe that money like blood must flow. But this technology thing really does, I think, maybe give the power. And one of the things that we're seeing in terms of political marketing, for example, is young people becoming more interested in politics because they feel like they are empowered through social networks and social media and things like that. And candidates are able to get out and touch them through Twitter and Facebook and all of that. And so I think that's an interesting point. Okay, this group over here.
Okay, for social, we put relationships with consumers, basically in regard to social media. For economic, we put price of product and knowing your market. Technological, we put advancements, because it's always changing. Competitive markets, we put presentation of your product. We talked about like Samsung and Apple and how they're always competing with the same product. Regulatory, we put boundaries, regulations of products in regard to like technological, environmental. And as far as like overlapping, I think that technology and social, obviously, they kind of overlap because without technology, we don't have social networks. And then I think competitive and economic overlap too, because you got to know the markets you're presenting stuff to. You got to know how to market your products.
One of the things that you talked about in your group, obviously, is the pricing issues with regard to the economy. How do you think technology has changed pricing issues?
Price management.
What?
Price management.
Yeah, the ability to look out for consumers to know what things cost, right? How did you used to be able to, if you wanted to competitively shop, what did you have to do? You had to drive around, you know, and actually look at the prices, right? Or look at ads. Right? What can you do now? Internet, right? And look at what you can compare car prices among dealers in just almost no time at all. So I think that's interesting. Okay, is there a group in here?
For us, social media, we put social media such as Facebook, for Instagram, that's makes it easier, globalization of marketing. Also, we added how TV, how it's kind of expanded on how many TV channels we have, so it can specialize on how we advertise directly, like NFL Network, we do NFL stuff, Disney, we do stuff, so they kind of centralize it that way. For economic, we put like housing loan prices, how
Okay, so with regard to privacy, since you touched on that, do you think you have privacy anymore? You don't think you have privacy?
Well, I think that has a good technology.
Do you care?
Yes, absolutely.
You do care that you have no privacy. Really? It's amazing what, so I have a Facebook page, and from time to time students will friend me on that Facebook page, and it's amazing what they post on their Facebook page that I sort of wonder about. Like, really? You know, businesses will look at this and decide whether or not they want to hire you predicated on your Facebook page. And it doesn't seem like your generation cares that much about privacy. You're willing to share everything with the world, you know, through tweets, through posts, through status updates. Now we know where you are constantly. You check in, right? Okay?
So a trend in social forces, we looked at consumer purchases based on companies that practice social responsibilities. And a lot of the overlap in some of these trends go to social responsibility, stuff like that. Economic, we looked at businesses that have a global influence, creating sustainable living infrastructure. So that kind of overlaps with competition. Having partnerships based on collaboration and value-based marketing. Technology, trend being data collection and behavioral targeting. And then regulatory, just general information about environmental marketing claims. So we kind of talked about cigarette production in the 60s, how they claimed it was healthy, and we now know it's not healthy. So are all these environmental friendly marketing claims true, or are they not, et cetera?
Yeah, one of the things that they look at in terms of things like environmental friendliness is how much recycling you do. Some recycling is actually not good for the environment. A lot of people don't realize it. So how many of you got something that says, you know, made with 50% recycled paper? There's some controversy as to whether or not that's sustainable, because recycled paper, for example, takes a lot of energy to recycle. And people think we're, you know, deforesting rainforests to make paper, and that's really not the case. Paper actually, the trees that they use to make paper are fast-growing trees, and they're growing specifically for that purpose. Now, maybe we ought to use less stuff, put stuff up on D2L and stuff like that, rather than actually give you a syllabi, but I don't know. Okay?
Kind of take on social issues, reaching the right type. I think more of the buying power now is with women and children, especially in the home. At least in my home, wife controls a checkbook at least, so being able to reach the right types. An economic issue, which is, I think has always been one, is there's still people in this world that can't reach, that are not informed, whether it be government or products or anything like that. Technology, it's always changing, something always new. It's hard to be ahead of technology. I feel like that's always going to be an issue, being the first out there and being the best. Competitive, it kind of speaks for itself. It's more of an issue of having the best product, the best price, all name, the biggest profit. It's more of an efficiency, I feel like. Regulatory, people are always going to find ways around laws, try to cheat the system, make the biggest profit. I think how all of these tie together, it has to do with the transfer of information and also adaptability.
Okay. What about, when do you think women actually became really important in the economic, powerhouse? What? Yeah, you're absolutely right. It was actually the 1950s with the consumer movement and consumerism, and women controlled most of the household spending in terms of, shopping for everyday stuff. And so there's Elizabeth Cohen in a book called Consumer Republic details this, how women really exercise both political and economic power through their purchasing power and choosing stuff for their homes. All right, is there another group? Okay.
All right, for social, you put down, social media and everything. For an example, on Instagram, there's been a lot of small businesses sending their products to celebrities. So celebrities can, take a picture with it, and then that's their marketing strategy. Everyone wants to follow, their favorite celebrity. So that's a trend that's been going on. For economics, we put practices in the country.
Yeah, practices, and each country can ultimately have a downfall throughout all other countries in the world.
And for technology, iPads, tablets, phones, laptops, everyone is, going on that to get to their social media, to see, what's going on there, instead of, magazines and newspapers. Everything seems to be all within technology versus paper now, and competitive. Another trend that's actually going on, a lot of people are checking reviews and product comparisons, like on YouTube, or they'll read it up on a blog or anything. That's a big thing that's also going on. And in regulatory, each company basically checks and balances the way they, market their products.
So I think it's interesting that you're talking about how one little country, for example, can have a huge impact. We thought we were pulling out of Iraq, right? And that we were going to be done. Turns out maybe it's not so, right? We may be rethinking whether or not, and I'm not sure that we should re-enter that, but because it has a huge impact on our economy. For the first time in history, this last set of wars was not good for our economy. In the past, war has always been good for the economy. Why? Puts people to work, building stuff. But we don't put massive numbers of people to work in munitions factories in war anymore, right? All of this stuff is assembled in high-tech locations with high-tech machines that have cut out a lot of the need for human interaction. It's extremely expensive, these smart bombs, but we don't have to have 1 million people. We don't have to have Rosie the Riveter, for example, which was going on in World War II, where women actually entered the workforce and were part of the war effort in terms of the production of the war machinery. That's no longer the case, and so that's a really interesting point. Did I miss any group? Anybody not get the chance to go? All right, we'll stop there for just 1 second. Okay, so you all did a really good job of coming up with some things that are involved in this idea of environmental scanning that are really important issues, and they're going to continue to be important into the future. And I think you did a good job, and a lot of you did a really good job of tying these things in together. So I just want to talk a little bit about some of the things that I think that you should be aware of as you progress in your careers. Even if you don't become marketers, these are obviously going to be things that are important for almost every business and every individual to think about. I want to start with the regulatory environment in the United States and what I think is sort of an important thing. And perhaps I start with the regulatory environment because I am somewhat solipsistic. My academic career did not begin with marketing. It began with political science, and I was a political scientist for many, many, many years. I got my bachelor's and master's in political science and then went and got a JD. And I taught political science here at UCO for a lot of years until I got moved over into college business and legal studies, and then went and got the PhD in marketing. So I have this tendency to love the regulatory environment and think in terms of the impact that it has on business and marketing. So in the United States, what is it that we face in terms of our regulatory environment? Well, we have a system in the United States called the federal system, right? And within this federal system, on Thursday, Dr. Borelli is going to talk about some unique aspects of marketing and the sales process that go along with that in terms of the sale of goods and services and something called the Uniform Commercial Code. But we start with this federal system. Now, most countries in the world, and this is important for most marketers, in that we will become more and more global, increasingly more and more global. Even if you didn't think you were going to work in a global environment, you probably are. Even little companies that you wouldn't think of as being global are now going global. For example, here in Edmond, Oklahoma, how many of you have heard of something called Jetta Corporation? They manufacture Whirlpool tubs. If you've gone to Lowe's or Home Depot, you've probably seen a Jetta product. Where's Jetta manufactured? Here in Oklahoma, right here in Edmond. Where do they sell? Everywhere, right? Globally, they want to sell everywhere that they can. And so this recognition of various types of legal environments and structures becomes enormously important as businesses attempt to go out and understand those countries in which they want to do business And what are the implications of that? We talked about, a bunch of you talked about technology and copyright, patent, trademark, intellectual property that we have to protect in this global environment. That's done in the United States at the national level largely through the United States Constitution, which gives Congress the right to regulate patents and copyrights, right, and trademarks. So we have a federal system in the United States, and you should remember this from American national government. What does that mean? It means that we have dual sovereigns. And why is this important for business? Well, in other countries that don't have a federal system, that have a unitary type system, rather than a federation, what it means is that there's a lot of concentration of power in a central government, which makes maybe understanding the regulations a bit easier in some of those other countries, because you only have to deal with one sort of nationalized set of standards. In the United States, we have this idea of dual sovereignty, so we have the national government, and then we have the state governments, and within their spheres of influence, they are supreme and sovereign. Where they overlap, we have this idea of concurrent jurisdiction or powers. What does this mean for businesses? Well, particularly like with regard to concurrent powers. It's an issue of taxation. Who can tax? Both sovereigns can tax. So what are a lot of businesses doing now as a result of trying to escape the tax scheme that we have in the United States? What are they doing? They're what? Yeah, they're going to other countries. One of the big ones right now is
Ireland.
What?
Ireland.
Yeah, Ireland is a popular destination for the tax structure that they have. Canada has become a popular one. And I'm trying to think of the recent food group that just went. Burger King has just decided to switch their domicile from the United States to Canada. And Burger King has actually been purchased largely by Warren Buffett's group, Berkshire Hathaway. And he's been critical. It's interesting because Warren has been critical of companies that try and domicile outside of the United States in order to reap tax benefits of those other nations, while still basically being, taking advantage of the fact that the United States is still what? Well, the largest economy and where, people want to sell the most stuff. So we have this idea of the national and state government. There are three things that have led to some different models of federalism that have increased the burden on businesses and marketers in this post-industrial world. And for most of our nation's history, what we saw was what was called the layer cake model of federalism, where you had the federal government on top and the state governments on the bottom. And the federal government was fairly small, and it didn't extend very far. It was a very small federal bureaucracy. Three things led to what we now call the rise of the administrative state. They were the Civil Rights Movement. You should know this for an exam. The Civil Rights Movement, the Great Depression, and an increase in technology that began with the Industrial Revolution and really started creating problems that were beyond the capability of the states to deal with. After about the 1930s, a lot of scholars argue that what we get is the marble cake model of federalism, where it's impossible to determine where the federal government begins and the state government end or begin. They have so much overlap. There is so much interaction because of things like grants and aid and federal programs that have attempted to take it into account the problems that economic disparity in the Great Depression caused and the technological issues that transcend state boundaries. So in Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution, the federal government's powers are largely defined. And in that article, Congress is given the power to regulate interstate commerce, commerce with foreign nations and the Indian tribes, And the states are left the power to regulate intra-state commerce. Now, as a result of a series of court decisions, increasingly what we have seen is the federal government taking a more active role in the regulatory process. Because almost everything touches interstate commerce now. There's almost nothing that isn't involved in interstate commerce. And this is where the civil rights movement played a role in the regulation that we face. There were two seminal cases. These might make good bonus test questions. There are sister cases. In 1964, one was called the Heart of Atlanta Motel versus the United States, 1964, and Katzenbach versus McClung. After President Kennedy is shot in Dallas, Texas, his vice president, Lyndon B. Johnson, becomes president. And he feels, I think, an obligation to the Kennedy legacy to carry on and pass the Civil Rights Bill. I'm not sure that President Kennedy could have ever passed the Civil Rights Bill. It took Lyndon Johnson, who had been the Dean of the Senate, to pass the Civil Rights Bill of 1964. In 1954, in Brown versus the Board of Education versus Topeka, Kansas, the Supreme Court had ended de jure segregation in public accommodations. Things like schools, right? Things that were regulated or owned by the government. Juries, courthouses, all of that. But we still had an enormous amount of segregation in the private sector, right? Hotels, restaurants, were all segregated. Movie theaters. The federal government passes the Civil Rights Act, and these acts are challenged as being ultra vires, or beyond the scope of the federal government to regulate. And the argument is that they don't involve interstate commerce. And in Heart of Atlanta Motel versus the United States Supreme Court looked at it and said, of course motels are involved in interstate commerce because when people travel, they have to have someplace to stay. So that touches interstate commerce. In Katzenbach versus McClung, it involved Ollie's Barbecue, which was an off-the-beaten-path kind of restaurant that had full service for whites inside, but would allow African Americans to come to the back door and get takeaway. And they said, we're not involved in interstate commerce. And the court said, oh, but you are. Because you got your ketchup packets from somewhere else, and your meat, and your tables, and all of this stuff. As a result, the federal government has been able to regulate almost everything. And in this highly connected world that we now live in, those regulations are becoming increasingly more important and more prominent, right? As almost everything has become part of interstate commerce. Can you think of anything that the federal government can't regulate if it wants to as part of interstate commerce?
Like state parks maybe?
What?
State parks maybe?
State parks, maybe. Of course, that would fall into the sovereign territory of the state, right? They have the right to regulate their own parks. Although the feds do regulate some of that, because state parks, for example, in Oklahoma, will allow you to do what? Hunt. And you have to get a permit to hunt in Oklahoma. And if you want to hunt waterfowl, you have to get a what? Not only a state permit, but a what? You have to get a what? No, you have to get a hunting license from the state. But if you want to hunt waterfowl, what do you have to get? You have to get a federal stamp, right? So even in state parks, if you want to hunt waterfowl, for example, you have federal regulation overlapping that says not only do you have to have the hunting license from the state, but you also have to have this federal stamp. Why do the feds care about waterfowl? What are waterfowl? Ducks. And what else? Aren't you all good Oklahomans? You should know this. This is them tripping off geese, right? Ducks and geese. And we have this treaty between the United States, Canada, and Mexico to protect migratory birds. And so the federal government regulates that as a result of the treaty clause. What, huh? It can't affect what?
Churches.
Sure we can affect churches, right? The federal government can absolutely affect churches. How do they affect? We've got this thing called the First Amendment. right? But the federal government, through its taxing policies, can affect churches, right? If they decide, for example, that a church has really become a political animal, they can revoke their tax exempt status. And they've threatened to do that in several instances, where preachers have, gone up and started saying things like, well, if you vote for so-and-so, you're going straight to hell. It's a bad idea to do. So the federal government is very active. But now the states are also active in this regulatory environment, right? In protecting things. And so we have to think about state regulation. So we have this dual regulatory scheme, and this impacts business because it means that we have sort of this burden in the United States that maybe other nations don't have. And having to understand, not only am I regulated by the feds, if I put anything, for example, out there online and be subject to that, I'm also subject to state regulation. If I want to open a business, I have to file, right, with who? Oklahoma, get a state tax permit, things like that. If you come into Oklahoma as a foreign corporation, which means a corporation that is chartered in another area, you have to file a foreign corporation registration with the Secretary of State. That's different. In other countries, you don't have to do that. Once you get permission to operate at the federal level in a unitary system, you're good to go, at least with regard to your ability to be licensed. In the United States, we have 51 jurisdictions. We have the federal government and the state governments, and so those kinds of things impact the regulatory scheme that we're in. We'll talk more about this on Thursday. Dr. Morelli will be here on Thursday. I have something that I need to pass out to you for next Tuesday for you to read, so we'll stop there for today.